Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Zeinab Badawi, and it is my great pleasure to be in conversation this afternoon with two titans from the world of art and the world of science. And I have to say, you all look magnificent from my position on high here. And I mean from the stage, not the afterlife. And we are suitably discussing immortality in art and science. So please, a big round of applause for our two guests, Jeff Koons and Professor Eric Kandel. Come on the stage. Now, Jeff Koons, of course, does not need much of an introduction, nor does Eric Kandel, but just in case, I will refresh your memories a little bit. Jeff Koons kind of came to prominence in the 1980s with that generation of artists who began to explore the meaning of art in a kind of media-saturated world. He's best known for his reproductions, his structures of everyday objects. Famously, last November, his giant orange balloon dog became the most expensive item sold at auction by a living artist when it went for $58.4 million. Wow. Didn't all go to you, though, did it, Jeff? And he, of course, is responsible for so many iconic pieces. A lot of you will remember the late Michael Jackson and those lifelike statues of him with his pet chimp, Bubbles. So that's Jeff. And then Professor Eric Kandel, a Nobel laureate. How apt when we are here at Nobel.
Why do you
Dialogues.
call him Jeff and you call me Professor?
Well, I just thought I would... Eric, you earned it. I will say it once, and then I won't say it again. Professor Eric Kandel is a neuropsychiatrist, and he's Professor of Neurobiology at Columbia University, so I'm with two New Yorkers. And he won the Nobel Prize in 2000 for medicine and physiology for his work on learning and memory, but he's also the author of highly acclaimed books examining that kind of interface, the bridge between science and art. You should be in the middle, really, if you're a bridge, but never mind. And so we're going to be looking at this question of immortality from the perspective of a scientist, from the perspective of an artist, and then also where the two have common themes. Jeff Koons, just... let's get this out of the way first. In the literal sense, immortality means eternal life. Would you like to live forever?
I would like to live for a long time. I can't say forever. I love life. I enjoy life. I have a lot of children with my wife, Justine. And so I have a great appreciation for it. I enjoy feelings. I enjoy sensations. But I can, I'm past middle age now, so I can also feel the declines to a certain degree. But I like the idea of making connections. Culture parallels the biological, but I like making these connections with the human disciplines, with other artists, with other philosophers, and it feels like a family that maintains itself, and I always feel like it's in our genes.
It's interesting. You say you enjoy feelings and sensations, so would you not like a life where you could just enjoy forever and ever the feelings and sensations that you have enjoyed, and also have the opportunity to just go on creating and creating more and more works that delight so many of your fans all over the world?
I enjoy the process, and so I'm in a, kind of a very virile state. I'm having great ideas. I'm making bodies of work I'm really proud of. I'm raising a fantastic young family. And yes, when the energy's there, and I absolutely want to continue. There are role models. Eric's an amazing role model of somebody that their mind is so vast and so efficient. And in their 80s, Picasso in his 90s late 80s, 90s, made some of the best work he ever did. And, so that really gets me every day wanting to be able to really exercise the freedom that we have as human beings to make gesture in this world.
Eric, what about you? Would you like the elixir of life, just literally have immortality?
No.
Right. That's the short answer. What's the long one?
I absolutely do not want to be immortal. I think that there's a meaning to a lifespan. I would like to be healthy. I would like to be productive as long as I live, but I could see a finite period of life to my life. As I said before, the satisfying thing for me is to die contiguously with Denise. I would not like to live by myself.
That's your wife of 58 years, Denise.
Yes. No one else would have me but Denise.
Where is Denise? Put up your hand, Denise. There's Denise. A round of applause to Denise. There you are.
But I do think, when I think of the Moses sitting here in the first row, that we all, I think, as scientists and as artists, make a distinction between ourselves and our work. One would like to think that one's work goes on beyond one. And I think it's different with an artist. One thinks specifically about a Jeff Koons work or Picasso work, and one recognizes it as such. With scientists, as I look back on earlier periods, one often forgets the particular scientist involved, but one remembers the work and the tradition to which it belonged. You know, hippocampus, grid cells, place cells, you put them together. And so that goes on as a stepping stone in the evolution of science. And that's very satisfying, to think that one had one small role in the evolution of a significant scientific idea. And I hope that my work on learning and memory would have some persistence.
You raise an interesting point. So a scientist cannot wish for immortality in the same way that an artist does, because they don't necessarily have a tangible object that you can still admire, the Mona Lisa, centuries later. However, there are scientists whose names do endure: Isaac Newton, Pierre and Marie Curie, Alexander Fleming.
Absolutely.
So do you think that what you say is really an observation on the fact that we today in modern society don't value scientists in the way that we should? In other words, they should be immortal, as some of the ones have been.
That's a separate issue. I mean, I think scientists are increasingly valued in society. I think people realize how important science is to their everyday life, how much it has enriched people's health, their enjoyment of life, et cetera, et cetera. It's just that there are so many scientists compared to, well, I mean, it's hard to say.
Great
probably
arts.
more scientists. For example, the Society of Neuroscience in the United States has over 30,000 members. It's hard to think of an artistic group getting together in the United States having quite that number.
Well, I think there are more.
There are more.
Yeah,
so I'm wrong on that point.
No, but I think there are a lot of artists.
There are a lot of artists.
Within the field.
I think science is becoming more and more appreciated. The fact, for example, that you are doing this, that Charlie Rose is doing things, so the public is learning about this. You have, you know, the Tuesday section of the New York Times has a special section on science. So science is getting more attention.
All right. Jeff, Eric has raised this question then of the fact that you know, great artists, their work endures and we still know them, and often they are household names, you know, Picasso, Leonardo da Vinci, or whoever. However, we do know that humans in the animal world are the only ones who actually create art. And a lot of art has endured for thousands and thousands of years, cave paintings and wherever, you know, from 35, 40,000 years ago. So the art endures, but the artist doesn't. What's your reflection on that? That, I mean, you know, how should we as society look at that? The art enduring, but we don't know who the artist is. They're anonymous.
I think what Eric mentioned in the scientific community, which is participating in certain ideas, I always just wanted to be part of the avant-garde. And it's, and, you know, to participate and have a dialogue with people like Dali and Picabia, Duchamp, Picasso, and, you know, back through history. But all of those things that you mentioned are in deterioration. You know, the Lascaux caves, you're not even allowed in because of the type of humidity problems. You know, if we look at our treasures, they're basically relics, and they've been just kind of put back together again. So, you know, everything turns to dust. So it's really about the participation. And if you can contribute something that you can give a spark to somebody that makes their life more interesting and that they want to participate in their community in a vaster scale, I mean, that's what I enjoy as a human being.
Does everything turn to dust? Because, I mean, you know, you go to lots of museums all over the world and you see that, you know, there are various climatic conditions that they have to maintain in order to keep the artwork there for generations and generations to come. So, I mean, do you really think that all art cannot be immortal? The object can't be maintained?
You know, I don't know if the earth can be maintained or the universe can be maintained, but there's also, you know, there's a beauty in the caring and the trying. And, you know, people who collect art and institutions who collect art, you know, are trying to preserve it for future generations and for people. But it's also a beauty in different aspects of obsolescence that comes into play and how things can also change their function through their obsolescence.
Eric, I mean, do you have any, because you've written about this kind of thing, the fact that, you know, a lot of human art has remained and we can still admire it, be they, you know, the ancient Egyptian drawings in, you know, in the Valley of the
Sculpture,
Kings.
yes.
Yeah, and even though we may not know who the actual artist is, we can still admire that art. So in a sense, art, in terms of immortality, can be detached from the author, from the artist.
No, I think it's very similar with science, in which the work is remembered even though the detail of the person who contributed to it may be forgotten. And I think it points out to an important similarity between art and science. People have sometimes historically made a distinction between the humanities and the artists on the one hand and the scientists on the other. I think that's a superficial distinction. I think that artists are investigators. They solve technical problems. In fact, many modern artists don't refer to themselves as being creative. They refer to themselves as problem solvers. And you see him taking all kinds of really demanding technical problems, degree of polish, degree of perfection. I mean, his work
sculptures,
is just amazing.
Technically,
just technically superb.
Yeah.
This is not done in 24 hours. This takes a lot of work, actually a number of people involved with him in order to do that. So, and the way he thinks about the problem, what strikes me about Jeff is if you discuss any work of art with him, even something that seems easily accessible, there's a thought behind it that is really quite detailed and deep, that resembles to me very much the kinds of ideations we talk about when we speak about the ultimate significance of a scientific work.
That's an interesting point there, because, Jeff, you know, we're obviously talking about immortality in art and science, and it is quite striking how a lot of your work are reproductions of rather mundane, everyday objects, which in a sense you could almost say is the antithesis of, you know, immortality. They're just ephemeral, common or garden things.
There are a couple things. When Eric was speaking about, you know, the scientist and the work, you know, the benefit to humanity, maybe the artist or the scientist can kind of get lost, but the benefit to humanity is there.
Persists.
And that's what I think is really important to the artist, too. I mean, you enjoy the pleasure of becoming, and as an individual, a human being, to the potential that you have. But I think there's a lot of play also taking place that it really is to the community and to benefit the community. But if I work with ready-day objects, everyday type objects, for me it's dealing with acceptance and with the removal of judgment to try to make an art that the viewer is not intimidated by, but there's a sense of familiarity with it. And that they can immediately realize that the dialogue within art, the type of abstractions within art, the transcendence that they can experience is accessible to them from the get-go, from their first interaction, and that, you know, the art happens within them. They are not required to bring anything to a work of art other than themselves.
Eric, I'd like you to address that, and also just to tell us a bit more about the work you've done on the actual, you know, what's going on inside the brain, the mind of the beholder when they look and admire a beautiful work of art or a work of art.
Well, it obviously engages many aspects of the brain. The visual system gets activated. And if we look at a portrait, for example, there is a large area of the brain devoted to the perception of faces than any other object in the universe. In fact, as Darwin pointed out, faces are special. We recognize each other through our faces. We recognize each other's emotional expressions. If I turn this glass upside down, I'll spill the water, but you'll recognize the glass. If you turn a face upside down, you have a difficult time recognizing a face unless you're very, very familiar with it. So there's tremendous processing in the brain that goes on when one responds to it. Also, there are emotional responses to it. There's an area called the amygdala which orchestrates emotion, and there are areas in the hypothalamus, for example, that actually represents it. And very interesting, for example, you see in many works of art, you see in Klimt, for example, a fusion of eroticism with aggression. Two opposing trends. How do you see? But we know this occurs in human life. Eroticism and aggression all too often fuses. It turns out that recently David Anderson has found that there are cells in the hypothalamus that mediate aggression. There are cells in the hypothalamus that mediate mating, sexual behavior. There's an overlap. 20% of the cells are shared between aggression and mating. And it's a question of intensity. If you activate that common population weakly, you have eros. If you activate them strongly, you get aggression. So you can see, art and science merging there in a sort of a common basal mechanism. It's really quite interesting.
Do you find that interesting, Jeff? Because a lot of your work, or some of your work, not a lot of it, has, of course, explored the naked human form.
Absolutely.
Erotic.
Well, just the interest.
He's not very strong in aggression, but he's very strong in eros.
Yes.
But
thank you, Eric. I was far too modest to bring that up. Thank you.
But also just in the ways of communicating and in enjoying biology and the storage of information. The way I perform as an artist, I follow my interests. And it's the only thing that you can do in life. You don't have anybody else's interest to follow, just your own. And you follow your interests, and if you focus on those interests, it takes you to a really very metaphysical place where you come in contact with kind of the universal. And I feel they're connected biologically. It's just like kind of stringing popcorn. I can feel connected to Manet, and I can feel connected to Boucher, and I can just go back through time to the Paleolithic. And that type of connection to humanity through biology, I'm really interested in. And I've talked to Eric already.
I think this is true. We feel very much, I've been influenced by a number of people, and I see myself moving in that tradition. Hopefully I've influenced some people. So there is a sense of school, if you will, in a metaphorical sense, in which one belongs and one communicates with. He often says he has conversations with. And you see, for example, Picasso at the end of his life began to pick out some of the people that influenced him and began to work in their format in order to relive it. But there is another similarity that is emerging contemporaneously in art and science. Jeff speaks about the fact that he wants to communicate with the general public. He wants to make his work accessible to a large audience. It used to be considered bad taste if you wrote your paper in a way so that it was extremely easy to read, that people in other fields could read it, or if you could communicate in a way that it was comprehensible to others. I had a friend, Jimmy Schwartz. We would rehearse each other's talks, and it would be incomprehensible to me. And I would say, Jimmy, I find it difficult to understand what you're saying, and I'm your colleague. He said, at Rockefeller, they told me if you made your talk too simple, they thought you were an idiot. You had to complicate it and confuse people.
We've got roving microphones, everybody, and I'd like to take some comments here before we just go. We've been talking about immortality in art and science and with the artists and scientists. Is there anybody, please? There are microphones. Put your hand up if you want to say something. Briefly, microphone, ushers, one there, another one anywhere, please. Yeah, could you take it? Yeah, usher, there's one there. Anybody this side, please? Yeah. Anybody want to make a point here? Okay, let's just have an intervention there. Meanwhile, the rest of you think about it. It doesn't have to be a question. It can be a comment or an observation. Just hold it closer.
Okay. I have a question to both of the speakers. Then it's about, so you mentioned that some of the cells that are activated through violence and mating overlap. Do you think that some artists sometimes just exploit the sheer violence and sex in their art forms so that they can appeal to a broader audience?
Okay, there you are. Jeff, do you want to answer that, just to provoke a reaction?
You know, I think as an artist myself, I mean, as I mentioned before, I love feelings, so I always want to experience strong sensations, and I've always wanted to recreate those sensations in my body. So by making my art, I've been able to do that for myself, and then I try to communicate with others. So I think if anybody tries just to shock for shock's sake, it doesn't last long. The only thing that really penetrates is honesty. And you just have to be honest. And that's really what ends up to be the most shocking.
Do you want to answer that, Eric, while we get another hand up somewhere?
Can I answer that
Yeah,
also?
do, please. Yeah, I was just...
I completely agree with Jeff. One of the paintings I like in particular that has both of these themes is by Klimt, called Judith and Holofernes, in which Judith, this modest Jewish widow, has cut off Holofernes. He was the leader of the Assyrian troops that was putting a siege around her city, cut off his head after having sex with him, and fondles in the corner. So you can really see her in a postcoital trance. And I think what Klimt was trying to say, as he said in all of his work, Freud did not realize that women have an independent, rich sexual life comparable to that of men. And he showed in his drawings that they absolutely did this. And here in Judith and Holofernes shows that, like men, they confuse eroticism with aggression. So he did it as a way of showing the nature of life forces, not as a way of getting an audience.
Mm-hmm. Any more points from the floor? Yeah, one hand there. Or are you just scratching your head? Oh, yes, you are. There. Sorry, yes. Microphone there, I wasn't sure.
Hi, Eric, you mentioned about how artists often think like scientists. Is there any examples where scientists can benefit from thinking like artists, or is there not really a distinction?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Stephen Kufler, many of you are too young to realize them, but maybe the Moses barely still experience them. I really loved the way he put his figures together. They were so artistic, they were so creative. There weren't 400 components that you had a difficult time reading the figure legends. Everything was very clear and very simply explained. He would go from one system to looking for different preparations that would solve different problems. No, there is an artistic style to certain scientists. Also, I think the modern tendency to communicate to the general public, to feel an obligation. We're supported by the public. We have an obligation to make our work clear to them, is in a sense a somewhat artistic enterprise.
What about you, Jeff? I mean, were you ever interested in science when you were at college? I mean, I know you were at school and college. You were very inspired by Salvador Dali when you were a teenager and that kind of thing. Science?
When I was graduating high school, I started to really become interested in the disciplines, the human disciplines. And so as my work and my ideas became interested in certain areas, then I would follow that. So you're speaking about scientists. I contacted Dr. Richard P. Feynman because of his interest in art, and he was a painter. He would make paintings and make artwork. So Feynman helped me make my equilibrium tanks, where I'll create just a basketball hovering in equilibrium. And I wanted to make permanent equilibrium, and Feynman told me I could do it. But within the confines of the aquarium that I was working with and the purity that I wanted to keep in the environment, I wasn't able to, so I just created a temporal equilibrium.
Mm-hmm. And you've actually got a collaboration, or you're working with MIT at the moment, aren't you, in how you can work on your sculptures, is that right? So there's an interface between the artist and science.
That's right. I made a partnership with MIT where they, with the Bits and Atoms department, where they try to help me come up with ways to be more efficient in making my works and being able to make surfaces that are durable.
So there's been skateboarders going up and down some of your, or one of your sculptures.
I mean,
is that right?
that can happen.
That can happen. Yeah. That's not good,
so
though, is it? You're not making things so people can use them as glorified skateboard areas, are you?
No. But there's some times where things that are fragile, or that it's a beauty to it, and that's what you want to make, and you want to communicate with that, because you want to work with kind of a sense of vulnerability, temporal quality, and then there's other times where you want to work with this confrontation between the animate and the inanimate, where you're confronted with, a stainless steel piece or something that really kind of is letting you know that it's probably going to be here a little longer than
Well, that's it, because your sculptures are made out of stainless steel, and then they're finished with this sort of mirror-like shiny surface, aren't they? So presumably that's very durable.
Some of the sculptures.
Some of the sculptures, yes.
But this type of dialogue, and I think that artists need to use every tool in communication. Eric was speaking about the different secretions could be make it be either aggressive or it could be erotic. You just have to use the tools of communication, but just be responsible to your community and to keep in mind the effects of those tools.
Eric, you were born in Vienna, but you went to the United States when you were about 8 or 9 years of age. But Vienna, of course, at the turn of the last century, was very much the cultural capital of the world, really, in a way, where there was a great deal of what we are doing now, a dialogue between the artist and the scientist. Freud was flourishing there and all the artists you've written about. Is that something that you feel we ought to do more rather than having everybody in silos? But do you think, it's pertaining to that?
I actually think this is a very beautiful point, because brain science is now reaching the point where it can begin to communicate between different disciplines. And I think this area that we're representing here between art and brain science is at a very early stage of evolving. It is something really, really important. So we can get a better understanding, not necessarily of the creative process, which is very, very difficult problem, but how people respond to works of art, what goes on into the brain, what makes certain art attractive and other art not.
We're, of course, all so excited to have one of the world's greatest artists with us here, but I want you, please, Eric, because I know we've got some slides, to kind of put Jeff Koons briefly in a kind
the
of
history
context,
of Western art.
Yeah, a kind of pantheon of artists down the century.
Okay.
So can
better
you
hold
roll
on to
the
your
first
seat now,
slide?
Jeff.
And I've got the control button here, so I'm going to move them on.
Okay.
Right? Okay. First one, please.
So let me give you a second of background. So Jeff and I met some time ago, and he asked me to go and look at some of his work, and I did, and I was extremely impressed with the fact that I could see myself in his art. And I sent him an email about that, and he got all excited. So I got together with him when we talked about this. He was obviously sort of aware of it, but he didn't quite think of it in those terms. So I did, and I want to put this in historical perspective.
Okay.
So
that was the preamble. Now the slide. Okay.
Right. So the history for my interest in this began with this guy, Alois Riegel, who was a Viennese art historian who died around 1906. But he said art history is going to die unless it becomes more scientific. And the science it ought to relate itself to is psychology. And the problem it ought to address itself is the beholder, how the viewer responds to a work of art. The artist creates the work, but it's not meaningful unless there is somebody responding to it, the beholder. So the beholder's share is something that we ought to focus on, how that comes about. And the beholder's share has varied as a function of period art. In the Renaissance, the thing that was important for the beholder, what people paid attention to, is the subject of the painting. So this important official, Hermann von Wedekind, was painted by Holbein. And the reason this was important is because this was an image of him. And that was the Renaissance view. This changed with Velázquez, this fantastic painting, Les Meninas. He painted the royal family, and you don't even see the royal family in this image. The royal family is off to the side someplace here. You see them in the mirror. You see the princess, but what you see in the center of the painting is Velázquez. I am the artist. The reason you're buying this art, the reason you find it interesting is because I am the creative force behind this. So it completely changed the view of this. Schiele, who painted 100 self-portraits, most of them in a nude, in various provocative situations, carried this forward. He said that the modern artist is the giver rather than the conveyor of identity. And next slide, please. Jeff carried this forward. Jeff has, in a number of his statues, either the whole, like some of his dogs, completely shiny, or, as I like particularly, he has these shiny balls embedded in a larger sculpture. You look into it, and here are two of us looking into this. You see Kandel, and you see Koons. You see, actually, it's interesting. You see Koons distorted. He looks like a Giacometti sculpture. Skinnier than he is. He's pretty skinny to begin with. So what is interesting is, for the first time, the beholder comes part of the work of art. The work may be immortal, but the fact that the particular beholder is transient. May I have the next one, please?
Is that the final one? Is this the final one?
This is the final one. There's one more I want to show after this. And this just shows myself looking at it and making the point that the viewer is transient, but the work goes on forever.
Okay.
And the next slide, which is the final one, shows here you can see several versions of yourself. But one of the interesting things about Jeff, and what really characterizes him, is the work itself is very deep. There's a lot of thought behind it. It often carries you in your imagination quite far, but it's easily accessible. Who doesn't like a dog like this? If you could afford it, and practically no one in the audience can, you'd buy the damn thing. So anyway,
You don't have to feed it, you don't have to take it.
readily accessible, doesn't try to confuse or intimidate you. People have said, art is becoming too accessible. We should try to make it more confusing. He has never felt that way.
Jeff, final word to you. I said you have made a huge impact in a rather media-saturated world. What did you make of that presentation, where you fit in?
I mean, you can imagine how honored I am that Eric would give an overview of my work that way. And, when I read Eric's book, The Age of Insight, and he would speak about the beholder's share. I realized how much that we have in common of what we enjoy, and what Regal did. And it's conceptual. It's really the beginning of conceptual art.
And has he inspired you to think about your work in a different way? Final word, briefly.
Well,
He's starting to work on snails.
Yeah, absolutely. A large inflatable snail. But I hope that a balloon dog, you also get a sense of profoundness. It's like a Trojan horse. And I hope that it can take you from that back through time, that it's like a ritualistic object. It's like a membrane. Maybe it was made out of intestine or something in the Paleolithic time. But I hope that it can take you on a journey.
Well, it's been my pleasure to preside over the Koons and Candle show. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
You did a great
Thank
job.
you very much indeed.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you. If you come this way. If you come this way. Thank you. Yeah.
Wow, well, that's quite a show to follow. We don't have too much longer left for the meeting. We just have time for one more panel discussion. But before that, I'd like to invite Paulina, our digital moderator, to come out and tell us what's been happening online this afternoon.
Hi. Is this thing working? Yeah, it is. Well, basically, you've been amazing. We have over 1,500 tweets in the past 7 hours using the hashtag Nobel Dialogue, and I think that's a great number. We've had some really lively discussions as well on Twitter, and especially around the question, one of our questions today, sort of the increasing number of older people, if that's an opportunity or a challenge. And I think some people even started talking about sort of sending, I don't even know how to say this if I dare to, but sending out elderly people into space. Sort of can we just send them to Mars and that would solve the whole problem? But that's not the way it works, is it? No.
That's not contrary to the spirit of the meeting, I think, a little bit anyway.
Exactly. I've chosen to focus on the positive side of this. I think that's a better way to end this discussion. And I found a quote on Twitter. Sabinia said, the elderly are the only natural resource in the world that is actually growing. I think she heard it in a panel, one of the panels. And I think that's sort of the way to think about it and reason about it. And it sort of makes me think about the very proud tradition that we have in Sweden, which focuses on lifelong learning. We sort of have a tradition of giving people a second chance to, if you feel that you've chosen the wrong educational path, that you will get a second chance and have another. And that's something I definitely think that we will see more of in the future. Maybe a second career, maybe even a third career, and I think technology plays a really important role in that. We have massive online courses. My dad is 70. He just signed up for a course at MIT, and he's so proud. So he refuses to be sort of a traditional retired person and is destined to get a PhD degree, which I think is really cool. And I think it's definitely going to get more common in our society. So that's sort of what I've been thinking about.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. My dad, when he was 85, built a homemade raft and sailed across the Atlantic. So he said...
There you go.
But that could just be construed as mad. So, you know. Anyway.
You never know.
Paulina,
Yeah.
thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Actually, just one more thing. Our website, we really haven't pushed that much, the website that much, but you should really take a look at nobleweekdialogue.org, because we will share, you can follow the discussion that we've had on Twitter if that interests you, and we also have extra material and sort of links if you want to dive deeper into some of the topics that were discussed today. So that's my recommendation, my tip. Okay.
Thank you again.
That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So to close, we have one last panel, and actually we need people out on stage to reorganize the chairs, please. Or I should start reorganizing, but... Hi, we need 7 chairs, I guess. Thank you. So, it's traditional sometimes at the end of a meeting to try and summarize what's gone on, but really, I don't think there's any hope of summarizing such a full day which has covered so much. So we're not even going to try to summarize. We're going to do something rather different, which I will explain in a second. Leave people to this. I'll leave it to you. I'm not helping. Yeah. Okay. Okay. 6 Nobel laureates onto stage, please. I'll hear, you go there. Eric, wherever you like. Sorry, wherever you like. Free seating.
Free seating.
Pick your positions. Thank you very much indeed.
I think we need another glass here.
Okay. More waters?
Yes.
Everyone okay?
There's another person here.
Oh, I'm okay.
So maybe we'll bring one here.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind. So how privileged we are to have 6 Nobel laureates to sit on stage here. It's some kind of a critical mass of laureates, I think. In fact, we do better because we have 2 laureates here as well. We have the 2014 pair, Edvard and May-Britt Moser, who have kindly joined the meeting. So thank you for being here, but you've had enough to do this week already, so you're excused. You can just, unless you want to comment, but you're free. So as I say, rather than try and get any people to summarize what has happened, we thought it might be nice just to try and ask our visiting Nobel laureates to give us some impressions of what the future might hold. So just to paint a picture of something in the future, good or bad, connected with this topic of the demographic change that is facing us. And I'm going to ask each of them to say something, and they are more than welcome to interrupt each other or disagree with each other. Who should we start with? Eric, do you want to start?
What does the future hold in science? My God.
We have 2 Erics.
If I could answer that, I would be rich and famous. I can speak in my own field. Brain science is a wonderful science that has really matured beautifully in my lifetime. But if you were to ask me honestly, how long would it take to have a really good understanding of the brain? How long would it take for the Obama initiative to reach its ultimate goal? I would say a century. Our understanding now is modest compared to what we need to understand. We're beginning to understand how one positions oneself in space We've learned a great deal about that. But even there, a well-understood cognitive problem, this is the first cognitive system we've understood in some detail. We still need to enrich that. And this can be said for everything in the brain. Our understanding of vision, touch, smell, we're really just at the beginning, memory storage. But we're making progress. For example, problems of consciousness, which is probably the deepest problem in the brain. Stanislav Dehaene has recently done some very beautiful experiments which give you some early clues to how consciousness might work. So if you show somebody an image of your face, very transiently with a masking stimulus afterwards, I don't see your face consciously. But if I do brain imaging, fMRI on your brain, I can see that the visual system lights up when I look at your face transiently, even though I don't consciously recognize it, but the information stays in the back of the brain. But if I now look at your image for a persistent period of time without a masking stimulus, so I'm consciously aware of it, that information propagates forward so that other areas involved in speech, in action, can take part of that information. So the propagation of information is a critical part of consciousness. So we're beginning to have some small empirical hold on the problem that can carry us forward. So it's encouraging for many of the major problems, even when we're very far from understanding them, they no longer intimidate the hell out of us.
That's a big change.
It is a big change.
Thank you. Eric Maske.
Well, I'm an economist, and I participated in 2 economic panels today, which suggested that there are some pretty big problems ahead. There are 2 related difficulties. One is that people are living longer, and so their period of retirement is extending. And at the same time, fertility rates are down, and so the supply of young people who are available to support these retirees is shrinking in relative terms. Nevertheless, and despite the fact that economics is called the dismal science, I'm pretty optimistic. Yes, we have some adjustments to make. We have a transition to get through. We need to do something to make sure our social security systems don't run out of money. We have to make sure that we have the resources to provide for adequate health care. But in the longer term, I think we may be on rosier ground. And the reason actually is primarily historical. If you look at the way things were 100 years ago, we worked much harder. We lived much shorter lives. When we see the progress that has been made in just a century, even less time. Lifespan has increased on the order of 20 years in just a couple of generations. That suggests that these problems are surmountable. Even if we have to support people in 20 or 30 years of retirement, we can expect productivity to be such that this smaller supply of young people are going to be able to manage it. And for that matter, people are living longer and more healthily. We have the opportunity to push the age of retirement to 70, 75, whatever. So I think the problem is manageable.
Good. Optimistic view. Craig.
I volunteer to go to Mars. I like that solution. I really do think that we need to have frontiers, and space is an exciting frontier. It's a very, very challenging one, but I think a very interesting one for the human species. So I know that I was very motivated as a child learning about the space program. I really hope that we continue to explore and maybe someday colonize space, and then we'll need a lot more babies to help populate all of that additional space. I think my feeling is the future, is potentially very bright. There's so many good things happening technologically, and obviously these changes are putting huge stresses on society. I think the wealth gap is scary. I'm sitting between two economists, so I think I'd like to hear what they think about that, but it's scary that, and it's going to affect healthcare too. We need to make sure that we are fair about distributing quality healthcare to everyone.
Aaron, are you as optimistic as these people?
Yes. Well, there is an old Jewish say that says that since the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed, prophecy was given to the fools. So it's a little bit dangerous to prophesize or to predict the future, especially in science. We don't know where science is going to take us. But I think as far as medicine, I think that the future is bright. And I want to bring one simple example about it, and that's about personalized medicine, which is, in my opinion, the biggest revolution we are walking into. Actually, we are already in. And that's how much we are going to know exactly on what's going to happen to us in the future. And the example is a beautiful woman that I like a lot. Her name is Angelina Jolie. She showed up a year and a half ago in the American media declaring that she has a gene that renders her susceptible to development of both breast and ovarian cancer, and she decided to remove both her ovaries and her breast, which was amazing. I mean, she had a shot directly into the heart of the womanhood of any woman that I would have think of, but telling us what's in the future. We are able now to analyze certain genes. In the future, we shall be able to analyze more. And in the more remote future, we shall be able to analyze not only the genes, but the products of the gene, proteins, RNA modifications. And personalized medicine is not going to be only personalized because it's her medicine. It's not every woman medicine, but according to Lee Hood, it's going to have 4 P's in it. It's going to be predictive because we shall know what in the future, which is a little bit tricky. And it's going to be preventive, therefore, because prediction carries also the ability to prevent. And then last, it's going to be participatory. I think that the era of the physician who is, trust me, I am your doctor, is coming to an end, and the patient will have to participate actively in the decision-making process. So on one hand, it's very promising, because preventing diseases makes much more logic than treating them. Treating them is much too late. On the other hand, it's going to have huge societal and personal, religious impact on us, because we shall know much more for some people than they want to know.
But is this going to produce a 2-tier system, those who can benefit from this medicine and those who can't? Even more than we have today? Well,
that exists already today. Think of Africa, think of developing countries. They don't enjoy what we are talking here anyway, and we need to have a more just society.
Liz, do you want to?
Well, I'm thinking about something that relates to not so much individuals, but interconnectedness. And there's the obvious technological interconnectedness that we've heard about, but something more, and that is, I'll sum it up, I think empathy will change in this way, that we're learning more and more about what it is that goes on, as you know, in the brain. But I'll just give the example of what struck me. I worked very molecularly at telomeres and collaborated with somebody who was working in a very difficult life situation of very stressed people, and we found that situation impacted quantifiably on their telomeres. And that was a sort of moment for me which said, boy, I could sort of empathize in a whole other way because I understood what was going on. So I think as we understand more and more what goes on in the brain and individually, and we will now interconnect in a more empathetic way, because we'll really understand what's going on in others much better than we did through the sort of scientific research that is being done in terms of how the mind is, the control and commander of the body, and how that has effects that we can all relate to. And we'll be more empathetic is what I think will happen, and the interconnectedness will kind of let that spread much, much more readily than it might have if we didn't have a very interconnected world. So that's what I see as coming out of research on aging.
Did you want to pick up on that, Eric?
I think that's a wonderful point. One thing that would make an enormous revolution in psychiatry and in brain science, if we had biological markers of psychiatric diseases, if one, for example, could image the brain and see whether a person had schizophrenia or depression or manic depressive disorder or post-traumatic stress disorder. Some of these things we're beginning to have markers for, and for example, with depression. And what's wonderful about that is almost everyone in this audience probably at one point or another either had psychotherapy themselves or had a relative or friend that was benefited or was exposed to psychotherapy. But we still don't know which psychotherapy works under what circumstances, and that's because we don't have objective measures of that. With imaging, changes in telomere length, for example, we could really have a way of evaluating which kinds of psychotherapy are useful for which particular kind of person. When is a female therapist better than a male therapist, et cetera, revolutionize the treatment of mental illness.
Or taking off from individualized medicine, a lot of little tiny bots going around our body, sensing things in a real-time way and, giving information and maybe even, remedially spitting a little hormone in the right place. And, there's a lot of technologies from nanotechnologies that you could start combining these whole organism, mind and brain connections.
There's one other thing which this indicates. I think it is becoming important, and scientists are doing it more and more, to communicate with the general public, to explain to them what science is about, why it's valuable to society, and to really get them excited and interested in it so they realize they're investing in something that is extremely worthwhile.
Okay, so the future is bright and it's technological, either in space or in the body. Dan, tell us.
Well, I would not like to end this round of questions on a dismal note, but I'm an economist, so I can't help myself. I'd like to pose a moral dilemma, which I think is the future. Is that we see some medical technologies now that are prodigiously expensive. Proton beam therapy for cancers, which you start with a cyclotron. One treatment is about 400,000 kroner. The development of vaccines from tumors, which make the immune system recognize those tumor cells and attack them. That's about 2 million kroner for a treatment. It's probably not practical even in a wealthy society to have these kinds of technologies developed and widely applied to keep elderly people alive. Do we want to suppress this kind of medical innovation, or do we want to accept the health inequality that would result from making these innovations available only to the well-to-do? So that's, I think, a subject which is worth discussing after a few beers.
I think that's a very good point, and Aaron, you could probably speak to this better than I can. Take getting the human genome. How much it originally cost to do a genome? A lot of money. Now, it's really manageable for almost anybody. These things come down in price with time as the technology improves. So I think we should not hold back trying to develop them because of their initial expense. I'm sorry.
The most dangerous thing we can do to science is to limit it and to regulate it.
Exactly right.
Science should never be
Never
regulated.
be limited.
I remember the discussions
At
in the
least
early
not
80s.
one's own science. Other people's science can be limited.
I like your answers.
I remember the discussions in the early 80s on regulation of cloning, the P1 and the P2 laboratories. It would have been disastrous if we would have stopped it. And the same for the human genome, and the same for any technology. I think that it's an economic issue that what determines the price, because at the end of the day, this machine don't worth 2 million crowns, or this treatment. We should bring down prices to what they're really worth, rather than making physicians or private companies rich. That's the issue. The issue is not limiting science, because this will destroy us as a society.
Dan, do you see any evidence that that could be done?
Can the prices come down? No doubt they can come down, but I also think scientists are very inventive, so they'll keep inventing very expensive new techniques as well. It's going to be a continuing tension.
But It's partly a matter of what kind of healthcare system we have. That is, the American system, for example, has been one in which we're not allowed to talk about the cost of treatment. It's only the effectiveness of treatment that matters. That model may not be sustainable in the long run, and when cost is brought into the picture, that may not hold back science, and it may not hold back technology, but it may hold back the application of that technology to treatment, at least for a period of time.
But could you argue that if there is an incentive to bring costs down, that will then make an incentive to improve technologies to bring the costs down?
Now you're thinking like an economist.
I'm not sure if that's a praise or damnation. I wasn't quite sure about how you were trying to say this to me.
No, I agree. I agree with what you're saying.
So it would be good then.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
I think that having this kind of dialogue with economists and biologists at the table is great. I think we should do more of that. But I'm not so concerned about the costs. I am concerned about inequity. I think that there'll be, a lot of value to these therapies, and they will be costly. The problem is they won't be available to everyone, in part because of the cost, not because you can't make a profit by providing them, but by the very simple fact that a lot of people can't afford them, which gets to a bigger structural problem in our society, which is this gap between the wealthy and the poor, and the fact that you don't even need people anymore. Productivity keeps going up even though the workforce is shrinking. And that's a scary fact. I mean, I think that we have a future where we need to find more productive work for people, engage them in other enterprises like art and science, because frankly, we don't need people to work as much.
Astronomical exploration.
Yeah.
I'm with Craig. I'm going on that spaceship too. I like this idea,
yeah, exactly.
Because it's extraordinarily adventurous. I mean, it must be really extraordinarily interesting out there.
What a wonderful result of your combined curiosity that a meeting on aging ends with astronomical exploration. That's what it's all about, I guess. But sums it up. Now, given that, as we've heard, you are statistically going to live longer than the rest of us, I guess you're very well qualified to answer this question of whether you see, which we asked everybody, of whether you see the aging, the shift in the demographic as a challenge or an opportunity. And I guess I know how you're all going to answer, but let's just go through. Challenge or opportunity?
I think it's a wonderful opportunity. I have enjoyed my maturity a great deal. Not only in science, but by being able to do other things. And I think I have a perspective now I didn't have when I was a teenager.
I hope so. Yeah.
Onwards.
Opportunity. The challenge is to find the opportunity, right? So.
I'm a two-handed economist. I say on the one hand, on the other, but primarily an opportunity.
I think there's tremendous opportunities, and that older people have a lot to offer to society. And I think it would be wonderful if we could have older people working in the lab, doing rotations and learning about science. We always need, there's this issue of, are we training too many scientists or students? Well, wouldn't it be great if older people could do science as a hobby in their old age and come join us in the lab?
I'll send you my CV.
I would even say this. In the United States, an academic, if they're still active, does not have to retire. In Europe, colleagues every bit as good as myself are out to pasture. That's a tragedy.
In Japan.
I've solved the problem of aging. I have a 20-year plan to get down to an 80-hour work week.
Last word to you, Aaron.
I think it's a wonderful opportunity. How else we would have defeated or tried to defeat diseases if they were not existing? I mean, 100 years ago, people didn't die of cancer because they didn't live long enough to get cancer. So now we have...
Thank you all so very much. I think that was the perfect way to summarize the meeting. I'm very grateful to you all. And we're all very grateful to you, all the audience, both here and watching online, for staying with us for the day. I hope you've enjoyed it. As you probably know, this is an annual meeting. We hold it every December the 9th, and we alternate between Stockholm and Gothenburg. So see you in Gothenburg on December the 9th, 2015. Thank you all very much.